kind of jumping through Corinthians and Daniel, just two different video series, I guess. So we left off with Daniel explaining to narcissistic Nebuchadnezzar that what his dream meant. And that got Daniel promoted into an exalted position. And him and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel was at the court of the king. So old Nebuchadnezzar, with his self-absorption, since he couldn't take selfies, he made himself a gold-plated image. The height was like 90 feet, and it was like 9 feet wide. And he set it up on this plain in a place called Dura, which was in Babylon's province. Then he sent word to assemble the satraps. Satraps, by the way, are like governors. And just everybody, the counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, lawyers, all the chief officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, etc., gathered together for the dedication of the said image and stood before it. Then the herald, who's basically the announcer, the MC, loudly proclaimed, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and speakers of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, or four-stringed harp," which is called a trigon, dulcimer, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. I kind of picture this as when the music comes on, they drop it like it's hot. They drop and worship this image like boom. Yeah, ridiculous. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. So when the people heard the sound of whatever instrument or music, all the people, the nations, speaking every kind of language, fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. At that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought malicious accusations against the Jews that were living in Babylon, because they'd been exiled there because Babylon defeated their country. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." They always had to say that. If I was a king, I'd be sick of hearing that. "You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of all them instruments and music fall down and worship your golden image. Whoever doesn't shall be thrown into the fiery furnace." There are certain Jews from whom you appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They don't serve your gods or worship the golden image which you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was in a furious narcissistic rage. You know anybody like that? I do. Gave a command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, or worship my golden image self, which that I had set up? Now, if you're ready when you hear the sound of all them instruments, etc., and music, to fall down and worship the image that I made, very good, if you're ready to. But if you don't, you'll be thrown at once into that fiery oveny furnace to be burnt to a crisp. And what God is there who can rescue you out of my hands? Because I'm special and I'm entitled and everybody should listen to me." But God uses narcissists too. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "Oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to answer you on this point. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to rescue us from this furnace of blazing fire, and he'll rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he doesn't, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and his facial expression changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then he gave a command that the furnace was to be heated 7 times more hotter than usual. He had certain strong, buff guys in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these 3 men were tied up in their pants, their coats, their turbans, and all them clothes that they had to wear in Babylon, and were thrown into the midst of the blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, the flame of the fire killed the men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, the dudes carrying the 3, it was too hot for them. They caught on fire, burned up. King don't care. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell in there into that fiery furnace, and they were still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king looked and was astounded, baffled, dumbfounded, awestruck. And he jumped up and said to his counselors, "Did we not throw 3 men who were tied up in the midst of the fire?" They replied to the king, "Certainly, O king. We ain't disagreeing with you." He answered, "Look, I see 4 men untied walking around in the midst of the fire, and they aren't even hurt. And the appearance of the 4th one is like a son of the gods." I'm going to give you a side note real quick. The King James Version, which I'm not using here, has the Son of God when it references this, referring to the pre-incarnate Christ, because the usual term for God is Elohim, a plural form. Even if it was the pre-incarnate Christ, however, the pagan king would not have had him in mind, because he wouldn't have any clue who he was, but a son of the Babylonian gods, perhaps a minor deity or angel. The ancient rabbis, of course, would have fought any attempts by Christians to equate the 4th person in the furnace with the Son of God, so they portrayed God as turning Nebuchadnezzar over to Satan for punishment for the words he exclaimed here, as if he did in fact say Son of God. And they made out verse 28 to be a confession on the king's part that what he saw was after all just an angel. But we know better. It could have been an angel, could have been Jesus. But we consider it the pre-incarnate form, because Daniel, that bunch, those 3 in Daniel, that's why we have this book of Daniel here, because Daniel had a lot of prophecies directly in visions. Moving on. Then Nebuchadnezzar approached the door of the blazing furnace and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out of there, come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. The satraps, prefects, governors, etc., king's counselors gathered around them and saw that in regard to these men, the fire had no effect on their bodies. Their hair was not even singed. The clothes weren't scorched or damaged. They didn't even smell like smoke. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Nebuchadnezzar was scared now because, this was over him. "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who had sent his angel and rescued his servants who believed in, trusted in, and relied on him. They violated the king's command and surrendered their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or language that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut up into pieces, and their houses be made of a heap of rubbish. For there is no other God who is able to save in this way." Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. He knew he better not do anything different because he might be the one burnt up in the fiery furnace. All right, that's the end of chapter 3 in Daniel. Have a great evening.